Welcome to all of you who have tuned in for this morning's session, and welcome to our two distinguished ambassadors. We are all well aware that the coronavirus pandemic is not only a public health crisis, but has also brought about tremendous economic damage. We see that not only here in the United States, but also in Europe. In response, on May 18, French President Macron and German Chancellor Merkel announced their plan for an ambitious European Union recovery fund of 500 million euro to be raised in the markets and distributed as non-refundable grants to member states. We could not be luckier than to have with us two of Europe's most accomplished diplomats, Ambassador Philippe Etienne and Ambassador Emily Haber, to explain the significance of that announcement, the backdrop to it, and how they see this moving forward. Emily Haber has been German ambassador to the United States since June of 2018. She is also a breaker of glass ceilings. She's the first woman to be Germany's ambassador here. She also was the first woman to serve as political director and as state secretary in Germany's Foreign Office. And just prior to coming to Washington, she served in the Interior Ministry as state secretary in charge of Homeland Security and Migration Policy. Philippe Etienne is the ambassador of France to the United States. He also has a tremendous record of accomplishment, having served as France's ambassador to Romania, director of the cabinet of the foreign minister, permanent representative to the European Union, ambassador to Germany, and just prior to coming to Washington, diplomatic advisor to President Macron. I will begin by engaging them in conversation. I would ask all of you to use the Q&A function for your questions. And when you send in those questions, please do identify yourself, and I will do my very best to weave as many of them as I can into this session. And this event is on the record, so feel free to tweet about it, share it with your friends, write about it. And with that, let me turn to our two wonderful ambassadors. Ambassador Etienne, if I could start with you, could you share with us what you think are the most important elements of this Franco-German recovery plan from your vantage point?
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for having us, and thank you, Emily, for having this together, making this together. It's really important, I think, to explain what it means for all of us. And I would make five quick points to try to answer a question, Karen. First, it is indeed an historical initiative taken by the German Chancellor and the French President at an unprecedented moment in our history, with great dangers, both for each of our nations, for each of our people, but also for the whole of the European Union. Second, it's a historical initiative taken by two countries who have always, since 70 years, in the last 70 years, taken such initiatives when it was absolutely necessary. And it's not a coincidence. Well, it is a symbol. It is a symbol that this initiative is taken 70 years since the first initiative to launch a European integration. Our two countries have worked this time, and in particular the German Chancellor and the French President, on the basis of a real common work and in a true spirit of compromise, something which is historical, which is absolutely necessary, because our two countries must be up to their responsibility and continue to be up to their responsibility. My third point is that on the basis of this initiative, we now have a discussion involving all 27 member states and the European institutions, and on the basis of the proposal made by the European Commission on the 27th of May. So we are really in the spirit of a European Union with this initiative given by our two countries, but also now a work which we hope will be really rapid, leading to decisions on this initiative in the framework of discussions which already existed before, which are on the next multi-annual financial framework of the European Union. And the European Commission, with a big support also of the European Parliament, has indeed proposed something which is also historical, which indeed corresponds to the Franco-German initiative, but which is also very much well thought to give answers to what all member states expect and can expect from such a big decision. And by the way, let's not forget that the European Union, of course, has been maybe a bit slow at the beginning of this crisis, but everybody has been in the world has had it difficult to, because nobody was prepared for such a pandemic. And don't forget what already has been decided by the European Union before this recovery initiative, including a package, a financial package of more than 500 billion euros in loans in different sections and other decisions. My fourth point is that we have in this French-German initiative something which is absolutely unprecedented, which is a recovery fund which would be financed by money raised on the behalf of the EU by the Commission on the financial markets to support the most severely hit sectors and regions in the European Union, and to give grants to them. And this is indeed what has attracted the most the attention, but there are three other pillars in this initiative which draw the lessons from the crisis in terms of solidarity and sovereignty. Those are the two key words. So both of those two notions of sovereignty and solidarity apply to the three other pillars concerning a new health strategy, the industrial sovereignty, and of course the Green Deal, European Green Deal and digital revolution, and the European Green Deal, which must be the backbone of the and the center, which must be also the priority, or which must give all its sense and direction to the recovery actions. And my last point is that it's, of course, quite relevant to do it here in the United States, because, as I say every time, a stronger EU is good for the United States and for our transatlantic partnership. Thank you very much, Karen, for giving me the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Etienne. That was a terrific summary of the key points of the plan. And Ambassador Haber, I want to come to you and remind all of our listeners that Germany will be taking over the rotating EU presidency on July 1. So help us understand what Chancellor Merkel's priorities were in, as Ambassador Etienne so well articulated, sort of holding hands with the French at a time when the going is getting tough and Europe is faced with this tremendous crisis. And as Ambassador Etienne said, these are the moments when these two countries, France and Germany, act together in a time of necessity. And Ambassador Etienne spoke about the spirit of compromise with regard to the recovery plan. As you well know, much of the reporting about this plan has suggested that the much larger compromises were on the part of Germany. And those analysts have said, look, the fact that Germany is supporting EU debt incurred on this scale is a seismic shift in principle for Germany, and that Germany is supporting a package of grants as opposed to loans is equally significant. So Ambassador Haber, help us understand the German piece of this.
I return to the context. We've seen a massive, and as everybody continues to say, unprecedented health and economic crisis, a social crisis. We have seen 130,000 people dead from the virus. We'll see an economic downturn across the European Union of about 7%. It will be in Spain and Italy, people assume up to 8 or 9%. It will be 6% in Germany. So this is really, really huge. It's a crisis that affects every country and can continue to affect every country in the European Union. Now, as Philippe has pointed out, in the early days of the crisis, especially because health affairs are national affairs, countries tended to be very inward-looking, including mine. But it became quickly apparent what the enormous price tag would be if a lack of solidarity would continue to mark the narrative. We quickly altered course. We quickly switched to solidarity, both in health terms, equipment, sending respirators, welcoming patients from other countries, but the narratives continued, and they were potentially politically explosive. Also, the plan, as Philippe has indicated, did not come from nowhere. There had been very swift economic reactions as well, including the 540 billion package that the European Union put forward in order to mitigate the immediate impact of the crisis, but also the EIB and the ECB helped to provide liquidity. But this wasn't going to be enough. That became quickly obvious quickly enough. And that's where we turned to thinking what the longer term response for recovery could be. And yes, you're right, on two issues, we have changed the course in the context of this specific crisis that affects every country and does not issue from, say, economies or policies, right? But it's something that simply hit all of us and requires a common response. So we agreed that for the first time in history, the EU should be able to raise money on the international financial markets and provide both loans and grants, by the way, both, to European countries that are affected by the crisis. Would still have to be negotiated how the money would be distributed, although I think it's fair to say that you can predict that Italy and Spain will be the countries that will be at the forefront. So these are not Corona bonds because it is not the member states that collectively raise the money and mutualize debt. This is the European Commission. And the money will be accorded, attributed on the basis of plans. It will have to be related to the coronavirus or the economic impact stemming from it. Countries will have to pay back on a long period of time the grants and loans they have received. But yes, for the first time, we have accepted in this specific context a common debt.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Ambassador Etienne, let me come back to you. I thought Ambassador Haber did a really important job of explaining the singular moment the EU finds itself in because of the coronavirus crisis. And Chancellor Merkel has been very clear when talking about this recovery fund of explaining it as being one-off effort due to the unusual nature of the crisis. You have others who are making the case that this is the Hamiltonian moment for the European Union, including the German finance minister having used those terms. And I think President Macron also has an expansive view of this moment being the one where the European Union is taking a major step forward into a federal union. And as I pulled out my Financial Times this morning, the headline on the front page is EU budget chief seeks backing for business tax to fund bloc recovery. So this idea that the European Union, the European Commission, could now also raise taxes. So from where you sit, Ambassador Etienne, is this a one-off effort, or is it a critical step in this deepening of integration within the EU?
Well, Karen, I would say it is both. It is something which has been done for this unprecedented opportunity, but also it's a very, as I said, and as we all agree, I think very ambitious and historical decision. And since you mentioned the reference to the Hamiltonian moment, which is natural considering we are in the US, I would say also this comparison makes sense, although it's also very different. So excuse me to be so balanced, like a diplomat, but like in the period of the American history, we have leaders which are, I think, courageous and who have a vision of the future, and who take a decision with a view of both of their nations and the union they form. But of course, otherwise the differences are very, very obvious. And here we speak, and what Emily said about the German rationale, which is also a common rationale, is very important. There is already a compromise element in this proposal by the European Union on the basis of the European Commission proposal, which is the EU as such raising money on its behalf to give grants to the European Union member states, regions, and sectors most affected. And also the fact that it's for the future. It's not about considering the depth of the past. So it is a balanced decision. And as Emily said, the European Commission has proposed 750 billion euros, which are 500 billion euros of grants and 250 billions of loans. So I think that the proposal of the Commission has been made possible by the French-German initiative in particular, and by other elements, of course, but has also been quite positively accepted by the other European institutions, by the European Parliament, but also by the member states. It doesn't mean that we all agree with it, of course. Every member state will have its say now, but it's something which is both historical and well thought and balanced.
Mm-hmm. So, Ambassador Haber, both you and Ambassador Etienne have rightly put the Franco-German proposal for a recovery fund in the context of now the European Commission proposal of last week that President von der Leyen shared, which in a sense subsumes your Franco-German idea, adds, as Ambassador Etienne just said, another 250 million euros of loans, and then you have the multi-annual financial framework. This is going to have to get the support of all 27 member states. And Ambassador Haber, where do you think opposition is likely to come from? Of course, much of the press reporting on this has focused on the so-called frugal four: the Austrians, the Swedes, the Danes, the Dutch, who were much more supportive of a package of loans rather than grants. And it seems that one of the conditions that was included in the Franco-German proposal, which says that the funding can benefit those governments that pursue sound economic policies and ambitious reform agendas, is going to be an important condition, certainly for those frugal four countries. Now, the question both is about will those frugal four and will others support this spending plan, A, and B, Ambassador Haber, do you think that a country like Italy is going to be willing to accept those kinds of demands from outside for structural reform? So, Ambassador Haber, over to you.
Well, it's the nature of the European Union that we have intense discussions and conversations on policy issues that are so monumental and dominant as the ones at hand. So I think that is normal. What France and Germany did when discussing this proposal for a package was we believed, our countries and governments believed that the challenge was so huge that we had to alter the dynamics and we had to alter it quickly. And it's a historical experience that if France and Germany are actually joining forces in order to produce move, then it's usually impacting on the general discussion. So you've pointed out I don't make a difference between frugal and non-frugal countries, but in the four countries that are critical of the grant concept, and there are other countries who worry because they feel they're less had been less affected by the corona crisis and would therefore be less at the receiving end of solidarity and support. We'll have to manage that. But we have a lot of experience in managing different vantage points in a European Union of 27. And I believe that we'll see how we can factor in concerns of other countries. I'm sure you're right in pointing out that the PARA and the German-French proposal that points to sound economies or sound conduct of economies, that will be important in the conversation. So we'll see how this moves on, but I think there's a general sense of urgency that we have to move forward, that this recovery and resilience fund needs to be factored into the discussions of the long-term, of the multi-annual financial framework, because it's the same universe. These are not separate universes, and the one has to comport with the other. That's a challenge, but yes, there's also the sense this needs to be done. It needs to be done quickly, and we need to push for recovery. And it's about the future. It's not, as Philippe has said, about debts of the past. It's about facilitating and pushing for a swift recovery and actually using the crisis also as a chance for pushing forward digital and green agendas.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get to that as well. I just want to give you a chance to also speak to the issue of whether Italy would be open to accepting these demands for structural reform from outside. And also let me just encourage the great audience we have listening to feel free to send in their questions as well. But Ambassador Haber, did you want to speak to that issue of, member states having to meet demands of others for how to manage their economies?
Well, in the previous discussions on the relief fund, we have my country, Germany, but others too, have flexibilized their positions to a very large degree, because the relief fund was not just subject to conditions other than the link with the corona crisis or the impact of it on the economy. So we have flexibilized the conditions of the Stability Pact in Europe. So we've gone a long way there. And on the other hand, in moving forward now, the Commission will have to have some sort of oversight where the money goes and on what areas it's going to be spent. The member states would, that's our thinking, have to put forward national plans, and we'd have to discuss and negotiate the distribution of the money. So that's a very complex story where all countries will have to accept that at the end of the day, a compromise will be the basis.
Mm-hmm. And Ambassador Etienne, you've served as ambassador to Romania, you've served as France's permanent representative to the European Union. Tell us how you think this compromise will be forged among the 27. If you could share what you think the perspective in Central and Eastern Europe will be, and how you see this being debated over the coming weeks or months.
First, I hope it will be debated and decided very quickly, because although we all recognize the complexities and of the issues, we all also recognize the urgency of a decision. But indeed, based on our experience, I'm sure Emily has a great experience, as a big experience I have, even if I've been quite a long time in Brussels. Indeed, we know that we know more or less that every member state will come to this table with different concerns, and as Emily said, we know we will have to forge a compromise in the substance, which will not weaken the ambition, but which will take into consideration the priorities of all member states. In this respect, you mentioned already, Karen, asking Emily what she thinks about it, some of the parameters of the discussion. There will be others, because the Commission in its proposal has included not only this Recovery and Resilience Fund, but also has changed a little bit on some very important subjects its proposal for the next 7 years multi-annual financial framework. So there are elements which are very important. There is also the element you mentioned, quoting Commissioner Hans in the FT this morning, which is the resources, and the one part of the decision is of the political decision to be taken is the decision of what we call in the EU language the own resources of the European Union, the possibility of having some own resources for the EU budget. All this will be will be difficult, of course, or complex, better said. But all this also gives us the opportunity, and it's very the tradition of the EU negotiations. I mean, it's a good tradition to build a package. What we call a package of different elements, where every member state will be able to find answers to its own concerns and ambitions. The importance is that, and I am sure that everybody is aware of that, and is really to go ahead quickly and with ambition, because again we are in such an unprecedented historical moment. The EU must be up to this challenge. It's really important for the future of the European Union and all our nations. But I'm sure this awareness does exist with everybody, and I'm sure our leaders will find, and our governments and with the EU institutions will find the right decision, the path to the right and ambitious decision.
So, Ambassador Etienne, let me just stay with you for a minute, because you said something in your opening remarks that just you reminded me of now, which is this idea that the Franco-German proposal captures the need for both solidarity and sovereignty. And I think for some EU member states, there may be a contradiction there, that they worry that giving too much European solidarity, giving taxing powers or the power to raise debt on markets to the European Union might take away from their own national sovereignty. And just explain to us how you square that circle of greater European solidarity actually giving individual nation states greater sovereignty. Just talk us through that.
I mentioned sovereignty because the French-German initiative speaks both in terms of health and industry and finance of European sovereignty. But you, Karen, you make a very important point. This issue of European sovereignty is, I think, at the core of our integration, because now in the world as it is emerging, the national sovereignties of our nations will not be sufficiently defended if we do not together, sharing our national sovereignties, increase the sovereignty of the EU in the world. If we are not able to draw the lessons from this crisis through this new EU health strategy, which Chancellor Merkel and President Macron have proposed. It is one of the 4 pillars of their initiative. If we do not draw the lessons also through our common policies, including, for instance, a competition policy, of the way this global competition now is shaped in the most important economic activities of the future. So I do not see any contradiction between national sovereignties and European sovereignty, because both of them are complementary, and on the contrary, they are going together because of the conditions of our world today. As far as solidarity is concerned, it's absolutely necessary to hold together the EU through and to navigate through this absolutely unprecedented crisis. But solidarity, again, also has always been at the core of the European Union. We don't forget the role which the cohesion policy, the cohesion funds have played, and they do exist since, in particular, we have created the single market. So solidarity is also going together with efficiency and with more European integration, creating value for everybody, every of our member states. It requests solidarity also among member states.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ambassador Haber, I'm happy to draw you out on this point too, because I was quite struck when Chancellor Merkel was making the announcement with President Macron on May 18. She had a turn of phrase about the nation state not being the future. And clearly for Germany, this issue of the future of the European Union and European integration is also seen as existential. But I also want to give you a chance to talk about some of the other elements of the proposal. And one of those has to do with the climate crisis, which is also seen by many as existential. So, feel free to speak to this issue of sovereignty and solidarity, but then also I want to make sure our listeners understand some of the other elements of this package. So if you could speak about the climate piece, that would be great.
On European sovereignty, you see, healthcare in all European countries was national. This was why in European governments, when the virus hit, reacted nationally. But it became immediately apparent that in the margins of national sovereignty, they would not be able, countries would not be able to respond sufficiently. They needed actually the larger framework. And I think it's necessary to understand that European sovereignty is actually about protection. Protection that nation states alone could not provide. So this protection element in the face of crisis or challenges or a changed balance in the world is about protecting European nations. We continue to be a union of proud sovereign states, but we realize that if we want to sufficiently protect ourselves, we need to apply the European angle, and this is what European sovereignty is about. On the second question that you mentioned, the plan indeed covers a number of different angles too. We haven't even spoken about the health angle, which now, when we have, this is one of the lessons learned of the crisis, we've realized that in order to protect ourselves collectively, we need to alter procurement. We need to alter stockpiles. We need to alter possibly supply chains. We need to have a look how we can reorganize or add to national emergency plans. We propose to set up a task force to help and add to coordination among European countries. So that's new thinking. We talked intensively about the recovery plan already. There's a third pillar of our suggestion, which covers a green transition and climate. That would be one of the focal areas of the German presidency, as a matter of fact, because we don't only want to react to what the crisis has challenged us with, we also want to shape future policies, which means being more ambitious on the Green Deal, being more ambitious on green transition, being more ambitious on our climate goals. And the fourth element is the technological sovereignty argument. We have to look precisely how we can, once again, protect and guard our interests in setting up standards possibly in looking into areas where we have to protect ourselves against dissemination of false narratives or even lies and so forth. So in this sense, the crisis has been an accelerant to push for ambitious policies and use the moment to actually follow up on that.
So just let me also follow up with you, Ambassador Haber, on a point Ambassador Etienne made, which is there's an urgency around getting this done. I know the next meeting is on June 19, but the sense seems to be that this may likely be concluded at the start of Germany's presidency of the European Union in early July. But can you give us a sense of what you believe the timeline here will be? And is this a priority for the German presidency?
Well, in any event, it will loom large in the German presidency, even if, for example, on the multi-annual financial framework, we're going to produce results in this month's presidency, this month's meeting. Even then, it will be a major topic during our presidency. We'll have to push it through the negotiations with the European Parliament, and we have to spell out what it means in individual sectors, etc. The same is true for the recovery and the resilience plan. So whatever, how far we may go during the Croatian presidency, I cannot predict as yet, but what I know for sure is that this is going to be a major topic during our presidency, as the reopening of the borders will be, as the exiting from all the restrictions we've seen, etc. So it will be a major issue for the German presidency.
Mm-hmm. And Ambassador Etienne, one question I have is, when would the money actually start to flow? Because it sounds to me like the money only starts to flow next year. So what happens in the second half of this year?
Well, first, we have to take the decision. And the decision indeed will involve, as I said, a double decision, as always, on the spendings, the budget, and the resources of the budget. So we need, as Emily said, to negotiate with the European Parliament, but also with the national parliaments, which is very important. This is the reason also, and it's a sound element of our democracy. This is the reason why we must act very, very quickly to take the decision itself at the EU level, among member states and among institutions. But then we must, of course, we have also the decisions we have already taken, which Emily and myself, we have recalled. So we have those different strains of financial support which do exist. And we have, of course, also the European budget, which is already there. So we will have to act so as to make this new resources from the new future European Recovery and Resilience Fund available as quickly as possible. And we will have to look at how in the time in between we can act, but we have also, I repeat, taken decisions in this respect, and our finance ministers, our leaders, have also decided how to implement these first decisions. So I cannot tell you exactly when the implementation will start. The idea is to have the new financial framework in place for the period to 2021-2027, so next year. But I cannot tell you when it will be possible, because it first must be decided and ratified by everybody. And we are here really all willing to act as quickly as possible. And I'm sure this availability will be there as soon as possible. And we all want this to be a success for our economies, for the reopening of our economies, and for the recovery of all our sectors, which have been very badly targeted. As far as my country, France, is concerned, like Portugal, Greece, Spain, Italy, I think of the tourism, for instance, the sector of tourism. So we must indeed act very quickly to help the people who work in those.
Well, thank you. And I think if you do get this done quickly, that will be a powerful statement in and of itself. I want to ask you both the same question to end this conversation. As you know, we framed the event using the paradigm of the Franco-German engine as something that powers the European Union. And of course, as the European Union has gone through various enlargements, there have been questions about whether the Franco-German engine is still what animates progress in the EU. And I'd like to ask each of you, and Ambassador Haber, let me start with you. What does this moment tell us about the importance of that French-German dynamism at the core of the EU? So first, Ambassador Haber.
I don't think enlargement of the European Union has altered this fundamental rule. On many issues, France and Germany come from different vantage points. The economics and some policy issues. And if we manage to forge a compromise that will factor in the interests and the concerns of the other sides, then that actually foreshadows compromises that usually or very often have been possible to bring into the European Union in its entirety. It's not because we are two large countries, but actually because we have a lot of differences, as countries do, but we know that we need to overcome them if we actually want to produce progress. And I think it has worked. We shall see if it works this time, but that's a general observation.
Ambassador Etienne?
Emily made just the point I make all the time, which is that the value of the Franco-German motor to power the whole of the European Union lies exactly, well, in the importance of our countries, but very much in what said Emily, which we are very often of different opinions. And there is this political will, by our leaders, by our countries, to get closer to compromise and to provide the other countries of the European Union and the institutions of the EU with possible solutions. But I say possible because, of course, we have always, Germany and France, always recognized that at the end it's a decision by all member states. All member states have an equal say to the decision. But our responsibility as France and Germany, it has been the case since the very beginning of the European integration history, is to take these steps and to help the EU to advance, especially in those moments of crisis, like the one we are going through now.
Well, this morning's session was another great example of Franco-German cooperation. My sincere thanks to both of you for helping us understand better the significance of this plan. We'll be watching closely to see what happens. For me, it is always a privilege and a joy to have the opportunity to speak with both of you, and this was no exception. So thank you, and a thanks to everyone who joined us virtually. I know you benefited as much from this as I did. So virtual applause for our two ambassadors, and thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for doing this, and thank you to your wonderful team.
Thanks so much.
Same from the French side. Thank you very much, Karen.
Very best. Bye-bye.